I was 27 when Dad died, and my half-brother Richard decided it was the perfect time to remind me I wasn't really family. The funeral was held at St. Catherine's Church in Greenwich, Connecticut. The pews were filled with Dad's business associates, country club friends, and distant relatives I'd met maybe twice in my life. I sat in the back row wearing a simple black dress from Macy's, watching Richard hold court in the front. Richard was 42, 15 years older than me, the son from Dad's first marriage. He stood at the entrance after the service, shaking hands and accepting condolences like he was receiving guests at his own party. His wife Veronica stood beside him in a designer black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Thank you for coming," Richard said to each person, his voice perfectly calibrated between grief and composure. Dad would have appreciated it. I waited until most people had left before approaching to pay my respects. "Cassie," Richard said when he saw me. His tone was cool. "You made it." "Of course. He was my father." "Half-father," Veronica corrected quietly but loud enough for me to hear. Richard's jaw tightened. "We need to talk. After the reception. About Dad's estate." "Hey," I said. "There are decisions to be made. Family decisions." The emphasis on family wasn't subtle. Never was with Richard. The reception was held at the Greenwich Country Club, where Dad had been a member for 30 years. The room was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, servers circulating with champagne and canapes that looked like tiny pieces of art. I stood near the bar, nursing a ginger ale, watching Richard network. He moved through the room like a politician, touching elbows, laughing at jokes, mentioning his father's legacy and his role in preserving it. "Cassandra." A woman approached, my Aunt Susan, Dad's sister. "How are you holding up, dear?" "I'm okay. Thank you for asking. It's so sad. Robert was far too young." She sipped her wine. "Are you still working at that nonprofit? The environmental one?" "Ocean Conservation Alliance." "Yes. That's lovely. So important." Her tone suggested she thought it was neither lovely nor important. "And you're still living in Brooklyn?" "Yes." "How bohemian." She patted my arm. "Well, I'm sure Richard will make sure you're taken care of. He's very responsible about family matters." I doubted that, but I smiled politely. At 6 p.m. as guests began to leave, Richard found me. "My lawyer's office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't be late." "I'll be there." "And Cassie." He lowered his voice. "This doesn't need to be difficult. Dad left clear instructions. Just accept them gracefully." Henderson and Associates occupied 3 floors of a building overlooking Central Park. The reception area was all marble and mahogany, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. "Cassandra Morrison?" the receptionist asked. "Yes. Conference room B. Mr. Henderson is expecting you." Richard was already there when I entered, sitting at the head of a long table. Veronica sat beside him, along with a severe-looking man in his 60s I assumed was Henderson. 2 other people I didn't recognize flanked them, probably more lawyers. I took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, my canvas bag looking shabby against the leather chairs. "Thank you for coming," Henderson said, opening a leather portfolio. "I'm William Henderson, executor of Robert Morrison's estate. We're here to discuss the distribution of assets and the reading of the will." "Let's get started," Richard said impatiently. "We all know the basic structure." Henderson gave him a measured look. "Perhaps we should let everyone hear it officially." He pulled out a document. Robert Morrison's estate consists of several components. The primary residence in Greenwich, valued at $4.8 million. A vacation property in Martha's Vineyard, valued at $2.2 million. Investment accounts totaling approximately $6.3 million. And the Morrison Family Trust, established 25 years ago, currently valued at approximately $12 million. I already knew most of this. Dad had been wealthy but not extravagantly so, comfortable enough to live well, smart enough to plan for the future. "The properties and investment accounts," Henderson continued, "are divided as follows. Richard Morrison receives the Greenwich property and 70% of the investment accounts. Cassandra Morrison receives the Martha's Vineyard property and 30% of the investment accounts." Richard nodded as if this was expected. I remained quiet. "However," Henderson said, "the Morrison Family Trust is structured differently." "Yes," Richard interrupted. It goes to me as the primary heir. Dad and I discussed this many times. Henderson's expression didn't change. Actually, Robert made significant changes to the trust structure 8 years ago. Changes he apparently didn't discuss with you. Richard leaned forward. What kind of changes? The trust now operates under a managed structure. The assets remain in trust, with monthly disbursements approved by a designated trustee who has sole authority over distributions. Fine, Richard said. Who's the trustee? You. No, Henderson replied. He looked directly at me. Cassandra Morrison is the trustee. The silence in the room was deafening. That's impossible, Richard said flatly. It's documented fact. Henderson slid papers across the table. 8 years ago, when Cassandra was 19 and started college, Robert restructured the trust. He appointed her as trustee with full authority over all disbursements, investment decisions and distribution schedules. But she was 19, Veronica protested. A child. A legal adult, Henderson corrected. And one who has been managing the trust expertly for 8 years. Under her management, the trust has grown from $8.2 million to its current value of $12 million. Richard's face had gone red. Dad wouldn't have done this. He knew I was the responsible one. I'm the businessman, the one who understands finance. Robert felt differently, Henderson said calmly. According to his notes, he chose Cassandra because she demonstrated financial prudence, ethical judgment, and genuine understanding of the trust's purpose. This is insane, Richard stood up. She works at a nonprofit making what, $40,000 a year? She lives in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. She drives a car that's older than she is. She lives within her means, Henderson interrupted. Which was precisely Robert's point. I sat very still watching Richard process the information. His face cycled through emotions. Disbelief, anger, calculation. Wait, he said slowly. The monthly disbursements from the trust. The ones that have been going to me for years. Those require her approval. Yes, Henderson confirmed. Every month, Cassandra reviews and approves disbursement requests. You currently receive $18,500 monthly from the trust. Your mother receives $12,000. Your sister Diane receives $8,000. Richard turned to look at me. Really look at me. You've been approving my trust money? Yes, I said quietly. For how long? 8 years. And you never said anything? Dad asked me not to. His hands clenched into fists. Why? He wanted to see how you'd treat me without knowing. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Because they were one. Veronica found her voice. This is clearly some kind of mistake. Robert was elderly, possibly confused. Robert Morrison was 63 and in perfect mental health when he made these arrangements, Henderson said firmly. And he reaffirmed them every year through annual trust reviews. The last reaffirmation was 6 months ago. I'm contesting this, Richard announced. This is undue influence. She manipulated him. Mr. Morrison, Henderson's voice was sharp now. I strongly advise against that course of action. The trust documents are comprehensive and legally unassailable. Any attempt to contest them would be expensive and futile. Moreover, he paused, pulling out another document. Robert included a provision. Any beneficiary who contests the trust structure is immediately and permanently eliminated from all future disbursements. Richard sat back down slowly. The purpose of this meeting, Henderson continued, is to inform all parties of the trust structure and to clarify current arrangements. Cassandra, as trustee, has absolute authority over disbursements. She can continue them, modify them, or discontinue them at her discretion. She wouldn't discontinue them, Richard said, but his voice was uncertain. We're family. I met his eyes. Are we? What? You just told me yesterday that I'm out of the will. That this was for family only. So I'm asking, are we family? Richard's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Richard has been receiving $18,500 monthly for the past 8 years, Henderson read from his notes. That's $222,000 annually. Over 8 years, that's $1.776 million. All approved by Cassandra. His mother, Patricia Morrison, has received $12,000 monthly, $96,000 annually, totaling $768,000 over 8 years. His sister Diane has received $8,000 monthly, $96,000 annually, totaling $768,000. Henderson looked up. In total, Cassandra has approved $3.312 million in disbursements to Richard's side of the family over the past 8 years. And what has she taken for herself? Veronica demanded. The trustee fee as specified in the trust documents, Henderson replied. 3% of trust assets annually, which is standard and quite reasonable. That comes to approximately $30,000 per month currently. Richard's eyes widened. You make $30,000 a month? Yes, I said. But you live in Brooklyn. You work at a nonprofit. You dress like, he gestured at my simple outfit. Like someone who lives within her means, I finished. Yes. This is ridiculous, Richard said, but his voice had lost its authority. You can't possibly manage a $12 million trust. You don't have the experience, the knowledge. I have a master's degree in finance from Columbia, I said calmly, which I completed while working full-time. I'm also a certified financial planner and a chartered financial analyst. I've been managing the trust for 8 years, during which time it's grown by $3.8 million. Richard stared at me. You have a master's degree? From Columbia. Yes. When did you, how did I not know this? You never asked, I said simply. In 8 years, you never once asked about my education, my work, or my life. You assumed I was poor and unsuccessful. You never wondered why. Veronica leaned forward. If you're so educated and successful, why do you work at a nonprofit? Because I want to, I said. Because the work matters to me. Because I don't need to prove my worth through my job title or my apartment size. Henderson cleared his throat. The question before us is the continuation of disbursements. Cassandra, what are your intentions? All eyes turned to me. I thought about yesterday. About Richard standing at Dad's funeral, telling me I was out of the will. About 8 years of dismissiveness, of being treated like I didn't matter, of being excluded from family events and decisions. About Richard's birthday party last year, when I wasn't invited because it's really just for close family. About the Christmas before that when he'd asked me not to come to the family dinner because Patricia finds it uncomfortable having Robert's second family there. About 1,000 small cruelties and exclusions, all delivered with the certainty that I was too poor and powerless to matter. I haven't decided yet, I said. What do you mean you haven't decided? Richard's voice rose. We're family. You can't just. Can't I? I asked. You were ready to cut me out entirely yesterday. Why should I be more generous to you than you were prepared to be to me? That was different, he said desperately. The will is different from the trust. Dad left you the Martha's Vineyard house and 30% of his investments. That's generous. That's more than fair for. He stopped himself, but we all heard the unspoken word. For a half-sister. For someone who wasn't really family. For what? I asked quietly. Finish the sentence, Richard. He looked down at the table. The Martha's Vineyard house, I said, is worth $2.2 million. The 30% of investments is about $1.9 million. That's $4.1 million. Which sounds like a lot, except you're getting the Greenwich house worth $4.8 million plus $4.4 million in investments. That's $9.2 million. More than twice what I'm receiving. I'm the oldest, Richard said. The primary heir. That's how these things work. And yet Dad gave me control of the trust, I pointed out. The trust that you've been living on for years. Doesn't that tell you something about what he really valued? Richard's jaw worked. What do you want, Cassie? Money? Fine. I'll give you some of my inheritance. Just don't cut off the trust disbursements. I don't want your money, I said. I want to understand why you've treated me like I don't exist for 8 years. Why you've excluded me from family events. Why you told me yesterday that I'm not family. I never said that, he protested weakly. You said the will was for family only. What else could that mean? Veronica spoke up. Richard didn't mean it that way. He was upset, grieving. He meant it exactly that way, I interrupted. He's always meant it. I'm the inconvenient reminder of Dad's second marriage. The half-sister who doesn't quite fit. The one you tolerate but never include. That's not true, Richard said, but his voice was hollow. Isn't it? When's the last time you invited me to a family gathering? When's the last time you called to ask how I was? When's the last time you treated me like someone who mattered? He had no answer. I stood up, gathering my bag. Mr. Henderson, what do I need to do to formally assume full control of the trust? You already have full control, he replied. But there are some administrative documents to sign. We should schedule a private meeting. Let's do that. I turned to Richard. You'll receive a letter from Henderson's office outlining the new disbursement review process. I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all trust distributions over the next month. A review. Richard's face went pale. What does that mean? It means I'm going to look at how you've been spending trust money. Whether it's being used responsibly. Whether continued disbursements are justified. You can't do this, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Actually, I can. It's literally my job as trustee. I looked at Henderson. When should we meet? Tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Perfect. I walked toward the door. Cassie, Richard called. Please. Let's talk about this. As family. I turned back. Now I'm family? Yesterday I was out of the will. Today when you need something I'm family. Interesting how that works. I made a mistake, he said. I was upset. I shouldn't have said that. You're right, I agreed. You shouldn't have. But you did. And it wasn't the first time. It was just the first time it mattered. I left, closing the door on Richard's protests. Henderson's office the next day was a smaller conference room. Just the two of us and coffee that probably cost more than my monthly subway pass. That was quite a performance yesterday, Henderson observed. Was it a performance? Wasn't it? He smiled slightly. You've been managing this trust for 8 years. You knew this moment was coming. Robert told me he expected it. I sipped my coffee. Dad said that. He said Richard would eventually reveal his true feelings. He said the funeral would probably be the catalyst. And he said you'd handle it perfectly. Henderson pulled out documents. He was very proud of you, you know. He had a strange way of showing it sometimes. He was trying to teach you both something. Richard needed to learn that success isn't about appearances or inheritance. You needed to learn your own worth regardless of others' recognition. Did I learn it? Henderson looked at me over his reading glasses. You lived in a studio apartment making $360,000 a year. You drove a 15-year-old Honda while approving Richard's BMW lease payments. You worked at a nonprofit because you cared about the mission, not because you needed the money. I'd say you learned it. I laughed despite myself. When you put it that way, it does sound a bit ridiculous. It sounds like someone who knows exactly who she is. He slid papers across the table. Now let's discuss the trust. What are your intentions regarding Richard's disbursements? I'd been thinking about this all night. I'm not cutting him off. Henderson nodded, unsurprised. But I am restructuring the disbursements. He's been living beyond his means, supplementing his lifestyle with trust money. That's not what Dad intended. What did your father intend? He wanted the trust to provide security, not enable excess. He wanted it to help family members build something meaningful, not maintain appearances. So what do you propose? I pulled out my own documents, a proposal I'd worked on until 3 a.m. Reduce Richard's monthly disbursement from $18,500 to $10,000. That's still $120,000 a year on top of his actual income. More than generous. And the conditions? He meets with a financial advisor. Creates a budget based on his real income. Develops a plan to live within his means without trust support. Henderson reviewed my proposal. This is well reasoned. Very fair, actually. I'm not trying to punish him, I said. I'm trying to help him. The same way Dad was trying to help him by structuring the trust this way. What about Patricia and Diane? Same structure. Reduced disbursements, financial planning requirements. They're all living beyond their means. They need to learn what I learned. That security comes from living within your means, not from spending someone else's money. Henderson made notes. This will not make you popular with Richard's side of the family. I know. They may never forgive you. I know that too. He looked up. And you're at peace with that? I thought about it. I spent 8 years trying to earn their acceptance. Working hard, staying quiet, approving every disbursement they requested. and none of it mattered. Richard still told me I wasn't family. So maybe being family isn't about blood or acceptance. Maybe it's about doing right by the people who trusted you. Dad trusted me with this. I'm going to honor that trust even if it makes me unpopular. Henderson smiled. Your father chose wisely. The letter went out 3 days later. Richard called within an hour. 10,000 a month? His voice was strained. Cassie, I can't live on that. You make $180,000 a year at your job, I said calmly. Plus 10,000 a month from the trust is another $120,000. That's $300,000 a year. Most people would consider that quite comfortable. But my expenses, the house, the club membership, the cars. Our choices, I finished. You chose to buy a house that requires trust money to maintain. You chose country club memberships and luxury cars. Those are your choices, not my responsibility. This is revenge, he said bitterly. For what I said at the funeral. No, I said. This is me doing my job. If I wanted revenge, I'd cut you off entirely. Instead, I'm helping you learn to live responsibly. I'm 42 years old. I don't need lessons from my little sister. Half-sister, I corrected gently. Remember? And apparently you do need lessons because you've been living on trust money while dismissing the person who approves it. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you want from me, Cassie? I want you to learn what Dad was trying to teach you. That real security comes from living within your means. That wealth isn't about appearances. That family isn't about inheritance or status. It's about how you treat people when you think they don't matter. And if I don't accept your conditions? Then the disbursements stop entirely, and you learn to live on your actual income immediately instead of with support and a transition period. I heard him take a shaky breath. You've really thought this through. I've had 8 years to think about it. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what I said. For how I've treated you. For all of it. I appreciate that. But sorry isn't enough. I need to see change. The financial advisor meetings. The budget. All of it. All of it. And if I do this, if I meet your conditions, then the disbursements continue. You get the support you need to transition to living responsibly. And maybe, eventually, we figure out how to actually be family. I'd like that, he said quietly. So would I. After we hung up, I sat in my small Brooklyn apartment looking out at the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Henderson. Patricia and Diane have both agreed to the new terms. Well done. I made tea and thought about Dad. About the trust he'd placed in me 8 years ago. About the lesson he'd been trying to teach Richard. And the one he'd been trying to teach me. That real worth comes from within. That money is just a tool. That family is defined by actions, not words or blood. I missed him. But I understood now what he'd been doing. 6 months later, Richard and I had lunch in Manhattan. He'd suggested it, reaching out for the first time to simply talk, not to discuss trust business. The financial advisor was helpful. He admitted over salads that he paid for with his own money. Painful but helpful. Veronica and I are selling the house. Moving somewhere smaller. How do you feel about that? Relieved, actually. The house was suffocating. We were drowning trying to maintain it. He looked at me. I've been thinking about what you said. About choices. You were right. I chose appearances over security. I chose status over peace of mind. A lot of people make that choice. But you didn't. He shook his head. You made $360,000 a year and lived in a studio apartment. Why? Because I didn't need more. Because the apartment was enough. Because I was happy. Are you? Thought about my life. My small apartment. My nonprofit work. My financial security that nobody knew about. My freedom from the performance of success. Yes, I said honestly. I am. I'm starting to understand why Dad chose you, Richard said. Not just to manage the trust. But as an example. You're what he wanted me to be. He loved you, I said. He just wanted you to find your own worth instead of performing for others. I'm trying. Richard pulled out his phone, showing me a spreadsheet. 3 months of living within budget. We've already saved $15,000. It was good. Strange but good. That's wonderful. Cassie, I need to say something. He put his phone down. I spent 15 years treating you like you didn't matter. Like you were less than. And all that time, you were managing millions of dollars, taking care of family and building a real life. I was the one who had it backwards. Richard. No, let me finish. You offered me grace I didn't deserve. You could have cut me off. You had every right to. Instead you helped me. You're helping me learn what I should have learned years ago. And I'm grateful. I felt tears threatening. Thank you for saying that. I want to do better, he said. As a brother. As family. Real family, not the performance of it. I'd like that. We finished lunch talking about real things, his kids, my work, our memories of Dad. It wasn't perfect. Years of distance don't disappear in one conversation. But it was a start. As we left the restaurant, Richard said, Thursday dinner at our new place next week? Nothing fancy. Just family. I'll be there. That evening, I walked along the East River watching the sun set over Manhattan. My phone had messages from the nonprofit. A grant we'd been chasing had come through. Good news. Meaningful work. I thought about Dad and the trust he'd placed in me. About Richard slowly learning what real security meant. About family being built through choices, not blood. Henderson had been right. Dad had been teaching us both something. Richard needed to learn that worth isn't measured in appearances or inheritance. I needed to learn that my worth existed regardless of others' recognition. I'd learned my lesson. And now, slowly, Richard was learning his. The trust was growing. The family was healing. And I was exactly where I wanted to be, secure in myself, doing work that mattered, helping others learn what I'd learned. That real wealth isn't what you have. It's who you are when nobody's watching. It's how you treat people when you think they don't matter. It's living your values instead of performing success. Dad had known that all along. And now, finally, so did I. 1 year after Dad's funeral, the Morrison Family Trust stood at $13.2 million. Richard had paid off his credit card debt and moved to a house he could actually afford. Patricia downsized to a condo and started volunteering. Diane launched a business with savings instead of trust money. I still lived in Brooklyn. Still worked at the nonprofit. Still drove my old Honda. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Because my life was exactly what I chose it to be. Every Thursday Richard and I had dinner. Sometimes with Veronica and the kids. Sometimes just us. Slowly, carefully, we were building something real. Not the performance of family. The authentic thing. And every month I managed the trust Dad had left me. Not just the money. The lesson. That real worth comes from within. That family is defined by actions. That success is measured not by what you have but by who you become. Dad would have been proud. Finally was too.